And walking into the theater already was such an amazing experience because I came from India. Everything around me looked like Zombieland. But I walked into the theater and I realized, oh, everybody's as crazy as I am. I've come home.
I'm here with Chris Lechner, and this is something I've been so excited to do and been looking forward to doing this for so long, is to actually have this kind of chat with Chris. And I think, well, I was about to say, out of all my interviews and stuff like this, is the one I'm most excited with. I mean, everyone's been fantastic, and yeah, everyone's been so great in the information that they've been giving. And there's a group of movers that I've worked with that they're exquisite movers. But Chris is someone that I've noticed from the get-go, from day one. There's an element in Chris's quality of motion that was so profound to me. It just kind of leaves you speechless a little bit. And Chris has heard me say this about him, and I still say this to my students to today, is that when I had my centre in Brighton, and Chris used to live in Brighton at one time, is we would sit in a little coffee shop next to my studio sometimes, and if Chris was then walking off, or even walking down Bond Street in Brighton, a lot of people would stop to watch you walk, because you could swear that you were just gliding on a skateboard walking down the road. And it was something that it's just been captivating to be around. You and I have done quite a bit of work together in the past with each other, and just exploring different movement ideas, because do you remember that time we drove up north in the UK, and we took the gyrotonic equipment up to fit camps? You and I just
This
don't
fit camp. Mm-hmm.
stop talking that whole journey, and was just, even in petrol station stops and cafes, we were just constantly exploring different aspects of what there is in terms of motion. It was, and working with you and having the quality of touch with you as well, because from your background in contact improvisation, it's left a lasting impression. So I'd like to say welcome, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that you too, I mean, I felt like it was a kind of life university, my time in Brighton, like 15 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, where without realizing, just by walking into natural bodies one fine day, and you were standing at the top of the stairs, it was like, but who is that? But I know you, although we were meeting for the first time, no? And it turned out to be like such a rich 3-4 years that I must say it's kind of informed almost everything else I've done so far. Just that you know how profound your effect on my practice and my life has been. And then having you as a friend at that time, so that we could take a ride like that, and just it was never ending, no? What we could explore together, also in thought and ideas.
Almost as if we would, whatever we did in the studio together, continued as we walked down the stairs, continued as we walked into the street, continued when we went.
That's how it felt. That's right.
Just always just a constant state of rolling, rolling with it, and it was, the conversation was rolling that way as well. And I think that there's such a rich amount of information, because it's the same, what that time with you has left such a deep impression that that's informed so much of what I do still today.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's something that, I mean, I asked you just recently, looking back, I never quite understood. I saw how much you had to give, and have never been quite aware what was it that from all the people that you could be hanging out with at that time, that you gave our friendship and in our conversations so much time. And it's wonderful to hear now, of course, that, yeah, there was an inspiration in it, and it stayed with you. Yeah, it's beyond the two of us, I suppose, no?
Exactly. So Chris, how did you get to where you got to? What started you off this whole journey?
I mean, I think because I was my parents were intellectuals, And I mean, God, were they brilliant. My father still is. My mother's passed away. But I mean, just not just intellectual, not just a little bit in the head,
Mm.
but visionaries with the intellect. And so it was very clear that as their son, I would follow an academic career. And what happened there? I was always really into sports. I always felt most comfortable if my body came into the picture. Something went well. I was good. Unfortunately, not so good in soccer. I was not so good living in Germany and not playing soccer so well. And so I ended up in the goal most of the time as a goalie. But I discovered more and more. I started training in martial arts, and within 2 years, they had me skip some belts and promoted me to the German youth team at that time. And it was all very surreal for me because I'd grown up in a world very different than the Western world. I was born and raised in India. My parents were working for a cultural organization in India. And so I was still grappling with, although I could speak the same language, I was not part of that world. And then all of a sudden, through my body, I became whole. I, I, I was relevant in some way. I started this, so this martial art, which was a very aggressive martial art, Taekwondo, Korean style. But there I was, and then I was playing drums at that time too. So it was very kind of vital, I suppose, the expression of just coming into the body. But I had started also playing the classical guitar. So not blues guitar, not jazz guitar, but really Bach and, you know, very technical, but very lyrical also, what you can do with this instrument. And so my father was working in Montreal, and I spent the summer holiday over at his beautiful apartment there in Montreal. And he was married to an Indian dancer, second marriage at that time. And they were writing an article for some big newspaper on why comparing Western and Eastern dance, especially Western ballet and Indian dance. And there were all these books lying around in the apartment because they were searching their article. And in one book, there was images of a male dancer. His name is Mikhail Baryshnikov.
Mm.
And I saw those images, this incredible vitality mixed with emotion and so much just as if somebody, if God had just said, you in this body you need to do this. And it jumped out of every picture. And so I was very intrigued, and we took a long ride to New England at that time, where I was with another book, looking at the book hours and hours. So I came up with this idea after that summer that I'm going to start ballet. And I needed it as a kind of complementary training to my martial arts. And in the small town where I was living in, there was nothing for a boy wanting to do ballet. But a mother responded, a friend of my mother, when I told my mother coming back, responded and said, oh, but didn't you look at the newspaper? There's a boys group. They're starting nearby in the theater, which is unheard of for ballet, that there would be a boys group. So I walked in there, and walking into the theater already was such an amazing experience because I came from India. Everything around me looked like zombie land. But I walked into the theater and I realized, oh, everybody's as crazy as I am. I've come home. So I walked up and did this first class. And it was wonderful because we did turns and jumping, all the things that me as a guy was interested in. And there was something else. There was feeling in it. It wasn't just like this focusing or harnessing your presence, which I knew from the martial arts, I was playing my body as a guitar also, which was, I mean, it was just, I don't know, it was really one of those moments where you wake up to who you are in your life. And afterwards, the teacher, who was happened to be the director of the ballet company also, took me to his office and said, "Here's our schedule. You come whenever you want. Here's a few slippers. Wear them, just not just socks. And here's also a jock strap. Helps with your balls." And so, equipped with a jock strap, slippers, and the schedule, I just returned every day from then on.
Wow.
And I'd found it never left me. I never left dance.
Mm.
And I think when we met in Brighton, it was the one time where I was kind of um, questioning my relationship to why I was dancing. So I didn't really want to be an artist anymore.
Mm.
And that opened the door so widely for our meeting because I didn't have any notion anymore why I moved. I just knew I wanted to move. And your angle of yoga was not to become stiller and stiller and more um, uh, kind of retreating more and more from the body, but coming more and more into this meditation of my own form. And you were a master in it. So it was like as if I found finally at the point where I wanted to let it all go, I found the right tools, the right meditation, the right contemplation of my body again, which um, yeah has as I said, been kind of a very major inspiration. I mean, I jumped many ways forward. In between, I had um, realized some 2 years later that I wanted to do this all the time, so not follow, not study, not go to university, but go to the ballet academy. And ballet was very exciting at that time because all the major choreographers were choreographing for young men. Ballet wasn't so interested in the tutus anymore, and the man wasn't there to be a crane lifting the female bodies. But there was that was what caught my interest also when I saw the first images of Mikhail Baryshnikov in those books. He was doing something. He wasn't being a prince. It was so beautiful what exploded from the picture into my mind, into my heart. So um, that was really the form that made a lot of sense to just learn ballet, study ballet, and then work with a choreographer, which was easier because there's so much competition with girls. Once you'd show up as a boy and have some talent, um, you'll get a job. And so it happened that I kind of um, had a kind of straightforward ballet career. And with 33, I had my soloist position in one of the world-renowned companies. I had a red sports car. I had a wonderful apartment, flowers, fans, the whole shebang. And I was feeling more and more uncomfortable about it. I was feeling very uncomfortable about wearing tights as a man every night, or most nights. I was very uncomfortable about slapping makeup on my face. I wanted to show my face. And I was in a body which was beautiful and celebrated, but I had the feeling it wasn't my body. So, I mean, around that time, I think I read the book The Monk That Sold His Red Ferrari and said, I think I need to sell my red Mazda cabriolet. And I did that and moved to England. And through um, yeah, things that you can't plan, some kind of circumstances that life throws at you. Um, yeah, the dance journey became so interesting because I was stripped away of everything. I had stripped myself of everything that that people appreciated me for also. But what I was left with was a love for what it was
Mm.
and the wish to find my body, Chris's body. So there you come into the picture again, how instrumental you were in encouraging that. Not a form, not what a yoga system or whatever system might tell you. Simply your breath, the ground, who you are in that moment. And that was all I needed to hear for a long time from you.
And then because you had a kind of a relationship with gyrotonic, didn't you, as well?
Yes, that was my life partner and wife at that time, Christine. She had been kind of the muse and the first student of Julia Horvath, who created gyrotonic, um, and therefore had this very uh, strong relationship to this form and this practice. And what was interesting was that it was a kind of moving yoga created by a dancer. So not by a sportsman, not by really, it was generated out of a dancer's understanding of the body. And a Romanian that had discovered yoga, although it was forbidden in Romania, he kind of silently found the ways to get hold of books and at night would study the yoga and then apply it. He was part of the national ballet troupe
Mm.
in his body, and he realized that his body wanted to go such different ways than what they were drilling him to do. So he escaped and came to New York, and even New York was too busy, so he retreated to an island in the Caribbean. And that's where Christine, kind of my wife at that time, worked with him for about 2 years, just on a beach.
Amazing.
And so this was, I saw that in her and was so intrigued that she um, managed her energy and her movement in a way that I'd never seen in anybody else. So she started showing me what it was, and then at one point gave it a name. Oh, yeah, that is white cloud yoga. It was called that way. I think a fashion label was called that way too. So Julia had to rename his system, and so hence the name Gyrotonic. But yeah, so we went to New York and studied with Julia then for half a year at that time, I think, some months, and um, that was um, also interesting in the sense that I almost had to stop dancing um, some years before I consciously decided I just want to move on because of a neck injury. I slipped a disc in my neck, and doctors couldn't help me. And a very, very dear teacher of mine, ballet teacher, David Howard from New York, introduced me to a fellow who was also working in New York, but was in Europe at that summer when I saw him. And David said, this man will help you with your neck. And Tier Throne is his name, a very flamboyant name, worked with me for about 3 hours and showed the fascia of the soles of my feet the way up to my neck. So I wouldn't have to do exercises anymore, but just simply by my feet being on the ground, my neck would always know where to be safe. And because of that, I could resume my ballet training and proper, and still had another 3 or 4 years as a ballet dancer. At the end of that period, as I was starting to get more and more embarrassed about wearing tights, I had arthrose, I think it was. That was the diagnosis in my big toe. So all the jumping had taken its toll on the toe. And I had access to the best doctors in the world. We were one of the best companies. There was, I mean, just had to say, get me to this guy in Denmark or New York, and they all couldn't help me. And when we were in New York studying, this yoga-inspired system day by day, many hours, because we wanted to make use of our time. I remember at that time I was smoking still, and we were in an apartment overlooking Central Park, which was incredible. So there I was, leaning out of the window. The smoking was, you were paria in America already at that time. So I was leaning out of the window, and I realized I had gone onto my toes. Until then, I was shuffling around like an old man because I couldn't use the toe anymore. It was such pain. And without me knowing, this practice had healed my big toe. I was on half point, as a dancer would say, leaning out, enjoying my cigarette. And then from then, I mean, the rest of the time, just hopping into my feet, just couldn't believe that that had happened. And no doctor could help me, not the best doctors on the planet. So similarly, some years later, I was for the first time back in India, and an Iyengar senior teacher in Iyengar practice just put me in a very strange position. I said, I have this neck thing. Nobody can really help me. Um, truly fix this. I mean, the Rolfing that I received helped me so much to dance still. But again and again, there would be every sort of second week a crisis, and I couldn't move the whole day. So he put me on a block and he put my neck a certain way around. And he had two, three other people come and help me with my shoulder and bring my elbow in and release the front of my throat and then take my sacrum up. And he said, wait there, wait there, wait there, breathe, inhale, exhale, deep exhale, inhale, deep exhale, come down. Finished. I was healed. And again, it was this mysterious thing that yoga inspired work would do something. And then, so the third time, you came along and I really felt gave me a body that now at 55 does things that I couldn't dream of even when I was 33.
That's interesting.
And I see you, and I see your body now, and I see, well, how one can walk the talk that way.
Well, I mean, it's, as you know, it's we put the practice in. I think um, I think the years of discipline, there's an interest that builds. You know what I mean? It's like putting money into an account. You get interest. I think you gain interest on that. So any sort of subtle changes that you start to make, the subtleties become understood in the system, because also we're waiting for that to happen. You're much more sensitive to it as well, rather than, we see a lot of people start getting into these practices and they come into practices like this without the discipline
Mm.
to do the practice, and they want to do all of the um, I'll call it esoteric, but I've got to be careful with that word in this. But there is an esoteric feeling within the movement, even though we can put it in substance. But a lot of people like to go there first because to them it means it's being spiritual, and it's like, well, actually, there's an absolute commitment to getting on and down and dirty with it, and going discomfort, pain. My martial arts teacher would, teach us various things, and then he would go, off you go struggle, and send you away for the month, and you go struggle with the practice. Come back and tell me what you learned from that. What were the mistakes you learned? What were the what felt good about it, what was hurting, and so on and so on. And that's still there, it's ingrained in the system. But I think something that we both know is that we understand how to move without necessarily putting ourselves through extreme pain.
Yeah, that's another aspect also, no? That you start learning something about you don't have to harm your body all the time, even though you're struggling with it or with the practice.
You watch an animal, it will move against itself, it goes against the grain, and it will change direction.
Yeah.
This is about bringing back something that is innate within the system, which is our instinct.
Mm.
And the instinct is not just about, my awareness of my field around me. My instinct is the internal awareness of everything I do when I move. So I know instinctively that I can't just make a sudden movement back there with my arm to go grab something. It's got a range that it can make, and it will come through the system when it's working well.
Yeah.
Animals, they just have it there. Felt sense that is probably one of the biggest senses for them. We've got another sense that sometimes overrides it, and I do see that the overthinking process and anatomy gets in the way for a lot of people.
Oh yeah, I mean it's a concept from before you embody it, no?
Definitely. So, I mean, because something happened, I remember because we had the natural bodies, we had the gyrotonic tower that you guys had, and we had that in the center. And, you know, we were willing to have that. Yeah, I loved having you guys there, and you were beginning to teach some classes from there as well. But that was that one day. I think we had been working with a bit of movement work together and exploring our qualities of movement and a bit of contact work with each other. But then you went to the gyrotonic tower and you just showed me something that I'd never seen done before, never seen it done since by anyone.
Mm.
It was your work, and it was just you exploring, and you just had your hands and feet in the straps and you allowed that equipment to dance you,
Oh yes.
and then you interfaced with it, and it was a combination of the two. And so the place that was actually dealing with all of the stress were the cables, and there was just the tower and you between those things, and something started to happen. And I remember sitting there thinking, this is exquisite. I've never seen anything like this before.
Yeah, because so much of gyrotonic is dependent on you kind of containing yourself towards a core or a center, and therefore using the resistance, um, yeah, kind of like as if you were moving through water or more, depending on how much weight you have there. And this, what I did, yeah, you're right. Nobody in gyrotonic world does that. Um, uh, Treated the body as mass. So I added a lot of weights to this pulley tower system and hooked myself into the straps, and the weights and my body mass were then the dialogue. So the weights, almost like a moon fall, I could let fall and roll up, and I can explore all the options safely
Yeah.
because I was dialoguing and building up a falling and recovering practice, a gravitational practice with the weights.
Yeah.
And that is something that gyrotonic actually does not do that way.
Mm.
If at all, the premise is that you more and more just leave all the weights away. You have enough control in your own body, very much like a ballet dancer, mind over matter.
Yeah.
But yeah, and because I was so informed at that time and so inspired by contact improvisation, it was showing me what gravity would do with my body. And so the gyrotonic machine became another partner. And I think it was also inspired by, I saw that you looked at it that way. The machine was a way how the ground came up to you and became circular, but it was the ground you were in contact with, not with stirring circles into a kind of void, no?
No,
So,
exactly. I think that's because that reminds me of that time when we did that crazy journey up to Blackpool with for the fit camp thing for Lydia.
oh, that was Blackpool, right? Yeah.
And, uh, and we put the bench, the gyrotonic bench, into the back of the van. My God, that thing's heavy. I never realised how heavy that thing was. We trucked it up there. But you know, there's definitely something with that. But I think the commonality for us is that it wasn't about the bench. It was the ground coming up through the bench to the object, and then there's a different combination. There's a different dialogue, like you say, that went on from there. And you and I teaching elements of that to the people that were there and watching them just struggle with themselves to let go enough to allow the object they're on to be a bit more in control, rather than, you know, you see someone that tries to move a piece of machinery, they go and attack the machinery and drive it like a car. You know, it's like, no, the
Yes.
machine,
Yeah.
you know, how do you work with that way? And I think, you know, when you were talking about contact, there was definitely an element where, you know, gravity became, maybe gravity was the element that introduced you and I. You know, because there's a quality of meeting around. Definitely have, from our different disciplines, the gravity is the constant.
Yes.
Then we've got a way that we work with it and allow it to move us and not be afraid to go to it.
Mm.
Yeah, and there was something that you used to do with those beautiful moving handstands where one leg would go up and you would kind of move towards the handstand and just gently come back down onto the feet once again. It was a specific way you did that.
True, without holding on to the handstand.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And, yeah, so tell me about your contact work then. I mean, how did that, what got you going with that? You know, where did you,
It's very simple, really. Um, well, again, one of those fortunate moments in life. Somebody called Steve Paxton, who happens to be the creator of the whole work, um, was invited for a theater festival in a small Swiss place. Never ever again after, and also never before. So that one time, that one moment in time, this man is invited to a place where I'm kind of around, see the newspaper. Oh, there's something interesting going on in the theater this evening, in the off theater, actually, the experimental theater. Let's hear him talk. And I was gobsmacked. My jaw just dropped what he was talking about. And the night after, he gave a solo performance, and he was improvising, but it looked like the most accomplished piece of dance I'd ever seen. And he was a child one moment, and then he was an old man the next moment, and then they had been talking about disabled people dancing. So that was the way he started the whole dance. He just started going into the spasm of a disabled body, but then transformed it into the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And because he's Mr. Contact Improvisation, there were a few dancers that night, and in the break they were rolling around, and I just couldn't believe what they were doing. They were doing something that no other practice in our Western dance tradition proposes. There was gravity, and there was an elegance in there, and a suspension between two bodies, and kind of what the sticky hands in Tai Chi kind of proposes to. That it just I was on fire. I approached one of them and said, "What are you doing?" And the woman happened to be one of the main contact improvisation teachers in Switzerland, and said, "Well, it's called CI, contact improvisation." And so I said, "Teach me." We met up already like 3 days later, and I was learning from her, and met somebody then just a little while later who was organizing um, workshops in Switzerland with people that work with gravity and improvisation, which was, again, just a window in time. I was at the right time, at the right place, and learned from some very interesting people. One of them called Laurie Booth. And that's why I actually moved to Brighton, because Laurie Booth got interested in gyrotonic work. And we tried to kind of create a movement gyrotonic environment together for a while. Um, so contact improvisation was the only practice apart from martial arts that would teach me something about gravity, which I was thirsting for as a ballet dancer. I wanted to get rid of the whole programming, which is so deep in you, to move away from the ground, to push away from the ground. Um, and what turnout leaves you with. Also, many years of exploring turnout. So I hooked up with somebody that I think you met too, Thomas Mettler. He visited once or twice in Brighton, and we had a 7-year partnership where we were exploring how to perform this kind of practice, and we had nobody else to practice with, so I would come over to Switzerland for a few weeks when I was in England, teach a workshop, and then we would hang out in the studio and practice. We would come over to England, and we would go on practicing, and eventually we performed also the work. So it was about 7 years where we did nothing else. There was then meet and roll around and develop a dance language, a partnered language. And what was really nice was that it was two male bodies trying it. So once you realized that it wasn't about sex, then it became very interesting. How could two men be so sensitive to the moment, to the bodies, look at the soft acrobatics and transitions, but be very hands-on with the material? Um, that was so interesting, and that was very exciting. And then finally, even Steve Paxton showed up in Brighton because he knew Charlie Morrissey, Small World,
Yeah.
gave a lecture also here in Brighton, which was very beautiful. I had a talk with Steve then later. And that was another big one because I told him how inspiring it was for me to see him 10 years ago and how it had shaped and influenced a lot of my um, learning process. And he kind of said, well, and so where's ballet in all of this? And I said, oh, I've left it behind. And I really did, I mean, I don't even remember when I did my last warm up as a ballet dancer. I just dropped it like a hot potato. I just couldn't be bothered anymore with that form. And so he was like, so where's ballet in all of this? And I was so proud that I'd gotten over it. And he looked really concerned for a moment and kind of went, okay, so this is something you did for about 20 years of your life, about 8 hours a day, 20 years of your life. And you want to throw that away? And I was just shattered by the question. I started tearing up. I didn't know what to say. I realized I'd been so naive, no, that actually the core of who I was had this garden had grown in that kind of a vision, in that kind of pursuit of something, some aesthetic, and it was deeply in every cell.
Yeah.
And there I started understanding you much better because you were at the cutting edge, let's say, of where body could go and how we could understand um, this thing that we are. And yet you had such an appreciation of there's something very classical about how you work, I find. I think you even told me once, wouldn't it be wonderful to be in a space and there would be white curtains and a wind coming into the windows and Bach music playing and we would just practice.
Oh my God.
I was like, yes, that's how I would dance. In fact, I created several solos for my body then, just like that. I would have light as if coming through white curtains,
Oh my God.
Bach music,
I
and
still dream of that possible center as a future idea, having something like that. Wow. Well remembered.
yeah, we created the Institute of Movement.
Yes, that's right. We did.
Mhm.
My God. And the movement. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Yeah, that's now been taken on by Mark Walsh.
Oh, you've already, I didn't know. Hmm.
Well, he's created something called the movement, and I sort of put in there. Popped a little comment saying, actually, this is something we developed a long time ago with a group of
Yeah.
us.
Well, it's just so yesterday.
And he was saying, oh, you always say that. You always say that you were there before us. And I was like, actually, no, mate, this is exactly what it was. And then he kind of, we had a bit of a altercation around it somewhere along the line. And he said, well, you're okay with me using it? And I just said, yeah, take it, because we didn't trademark it or anything like that.
Mm.
Institute and movement. I mean, I think that's being used by somebody else as well now. It's a different name.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's an interesting one because not so many people might come up with that in combination.
No, not at all.
Hmm.
But yeah, it was. I mean, but that's interesting. Going back to that, you with the ballet, and then see what I see is that you haven't dropped it.
Yeah.
And I think, thank God that was said to you, because you melded something beautifully together with all of the inherent instinctive attitude of the training that's come through you for that amount of time. And then to add to it something different, which was this element of gravity, which was always there in the first place. All you needed to do was what you found, you just come back to gravity again, but with that balletic quality.
Yeah.
Is like contact ballet. You know what I mean? It was
Yeah.
something
Well,
remarkable.
the thing is that I mean, I had been so drawn by and so compelled by a dancer that I worked with, Laurie Booth,
Mm.
called Russell Maliphant. He's now one of the very um, probably most important choreographers in the UK, and he also had worked with. He came from ballet. He came from the Royal Ballet, and had walked this path, to kind of realize that ballet wasn't the the fitting well anymore with him, and then slowly discovering gravity, and slowly more and more through his Tai Chi practice, realizing that something else wanted to work through him or with him. And um, that was one of the workshops in Switzerland that I was I could take at that time when I was kind of reorienting, and it had also a really profound effect on me that a ballet dancer could walk and go this way. But in my state of mind at that time, I was as a ballet dancer more or less copying him. That's, I think, basically what you do as a ballet dancer. You mimic the choreographer and then infuse a little bit of your own juice into the choreography. Um, but that was also the difficulty with it, maybe, that on the one hand I was discovering gravity, but that on the other hand, for me, he was a choreographer telling me, the dancer, what to do. And so I just kind of copied what he did. And Laurie Booth was a little more radical there. That's either you followed his way or, his way or my way or the highway. He was very radical, but not, in the right way, because he lived and died by his principles. So you had to take them seriously.
Mm.
And he also showed up in Switzerland, organized a workshop organized by Thomas Mettler. And that was such a wonderful thing that popped up in one of the workshops, and everybody was getting bored because they had the feeling, he was talking, we should be moving, we should have like a task for the body, and he just kept on talking about what we do when we move. And he said there was a philosopher in Brussels, I think, a Belgian philosopher, last century, that had um, categorized movement into the pictorial. So every movement that you make makes a picture. Wherever you go, it's worth that you make a picture. That is also how a ballet dancer will train. You want to make a photo album of the class, and all the best moments are there. You've found the form. And I think yoga is practiced most of the time this way. You're kind of trying to find the pictures, and because there's an energy shape in the picture, it does something to you, and you feel that you need to do that again. But this Belgian philosopher also talked about another mode, which he called the ecstatic mode, one where there is no form, there's only flow. And all tribes of this world will tell you about that mode and that meditation and that ecstasy. So that movement for him was, as much as it was form, it was ecstasy.
Mhm. That's
And
and you know that feeling. You know, you've been there. We've all been there, where something just comes together, and then you don't even know you're moving anymore, and it's ecstatic as it's happening. It feels so good whilst it's happening. You actually don't want to stop, and in
yeah,
fact, you can't. You can't. You know, because it's carrying you.
yeah.
It's
And what you do naturally is exactly this wonderful proposition that we either treat it either or. We're either in the ecstasy, we're in some club, or we're in form and getting all flustered and serious about it. And I see that in you. You pull that off. You enter the stream of ecstasy, but you don't lose the form. And the form is an open system then. And that's when dancing is interesting for me. That it's really when you're in the ecstatic, but there's form, there's a shape, there's a there's something that calls you.
Yeah, no, I totally get that, and it's interesting because what I was just thinking then is that these are things that we can make available to anyone. You know, they don't have to be a dancer. They don't have to be
Absolutely.
someone that does, you know, extreme yoga or martial arts. Is that they learn the quality of motion in their body. That, and I do find that when I meet beginners of varying ages, is that they're the simplest people to work with because it's actually right down to the pure quality of their body. They're not conditioned by any other process. Okay, they might be conditioned by the chair they've been sitting in for the last 20 years or something like that. But there's a moment once they get out the way of their own thinking. Everyone's got a relationship to gravity. No one hasn't. You know, we hear about the word ungrounded. I don't know what that means because they're always touching
Yeah.
the ground. They're not off it. I get the idea where someone, you know, whatever the behavior might be, but they're still on the ground. So you just give them a moment to experience that. And then something quite exquisite can happen. And the potential for everyone, the birthright, and this is James Oshman had said this, is that movement is our birthright.
How beautiful.
But along with that is that the graceful quality of movement is that as well. You know, we see that in
Mm.
every tribes person that you see walk, move. They all move relative to gravity, and there's no excess waste of effort in it at all. And it just looks beautiful. And they are, you know, in that moment, they are sort of stripped bare to their environment in a way, and that's all they've ever grown up with. So they've grown from the ground. You know, that's what we do. We grow up from the ground. We don't
Mm.
stand down on it. And you know, the clue's in the word. It's stand up. It's from below. It's not standing down from above. Not at all. And that's the part I think that gets lost.
Yeah, and the thing is, we take it for granted that we're standing up, although we're the only creatures, apart from penguins and maybe one or two other species,
Yeah.
trying this experiment, no?
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And you know, being able to negotiate gravity well is quite a task, you know, and it's I think
Yeah.
that people stand up and they think that they've got it. Is that, well, okay, that's great, and you can live your life like that, and people live to a ripe old age with it and do okay. And there's this lovely toying with gravity that we keep playing with, and
Mm.
we become gravity's plaything. But the
Mm.
thing is we're allowing it to play with us.
Yes, we're making ourselves available, aren't we?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And I think it's a full commitment to that. And you know, in any
Mm.
practice that we do, there's a full commitment of ourselves to that medium, that surface, that level of contact. You know, the contact improvisation, I would say, is that the earth is rolling, and all we do is we just roll on it.
Yeah.
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 So with uh, this is the thing, is that it's sometimes tricky to kind of know where to go in these sort of conversations, and they always roll anyway. Because there's a few things that happen with this that whenever you and I have worked together, and I know at the moment you know, the way that we're working together is through this medium because we've reconnected through Zoom.
Yeah.
um, but you know,
And yet, if I may say, after especially sort of the first 2 weeks reconnecting, um, and being able also to just simply um, soak up work again. I didn't have to hold any space or share anything, but simply soak it up again. I was taking walks with my wife, and it was like as if I was walking through Brighton all those years ago. And I realized it was that body memory and that space that we shared, which is much bigger than simply a Zoom, an hour on Zoom.
yes, totally. No, absolutely, I get that, and I'm always excited that you're there, and it's almost like want to kind of like dive into your box and be in that room with you. But there's also, you know, something with how we've worked together and the stuff that we've done. I keep seeing the purple room, you know, the lilac room that we had. that big space that we could utilize to the fullest edges, and we never went in the same direction. It would go all over that room. But even in your qualities of teaching, and I remember that time that you asked me to come along and I talked with you, and there was Charlie Morrissey there and a group of other contact people, and I used that great big battleship to describe tensegrity, because there were no tensegrity toys around at that time, and I was using the rigging to make.
Yes, I remember.
And, but this is similar to my colleague Rupert, is that you have a way of putting things across and teaching which doesn't require language. Language is almost too small for the process. You know, it's a language of feeling. You know, it's a language of experiential, and that's something that has always been quite remarkable. Observing you, because you get it, but I mean, I don't know if this is just me, but I feel how you walk. That's the thing.
Yeah, yeah.
So
That really helps me when you say that. Yeah, because again, coming back to the question, I was even then feeling out of my depth at that time when we were co-teaching workshops, for instance. And yet, so I just realized I had a long way to go. I was just starting on this journey. And that helps me understand, yes, instinctively, obviously, I had nurtured and practiced and inhabited something about being in movement that I hadn't quite found the scaffolding for yet. I was just discovering it with you. I hadn't found the language for it yet, but my body was there already.
mm.
That makes me really understand so much about that time, and thank you for saying that.
I mean, it's something you do, you know, and I know you're teaching now, but you're teaching something very different nowadays, from where you are. But you know, I can almost.
And it's the same though. It's the same principles. It's the same starting point. Where's your breath? Where's gravity? Where's your spine start allowing movement? And there's the practice. It's just not rolling with another body. It's rolling with gravity, the ground, or the aesthetic questions that come about when you say, "Why do I dance?"
And I can, you know, I know how I've experienced it with you, and learning by no words is really quite profound. You know, and I think it's a definitely big thing, because someone that's quite experienced will get that if they've got more of a somatic experiencing in their body and their self. But also beginners get that as well, because you know, kids learn that way.
Hmm.
You know, don't always need to be told what to do. You know, this is so different to the, you know, instructional type teaching where, you know, you go to a class and then you're told A to B to C to D. And I would get that in certain things. I understand it, but eventually it's just let go of, and this can take over. It's quite remarkable. And yeah, like I said, with you, it's been a profound experience to be around with that. You know, so it's part of your nature, though. This is the thing, Chris, is that you've got this quiet quality about you, and your movement is matched by the way you behave. And I was saying this to my friend Ed the other day, who I interviewed, who I'd love to get you to meet, and we will be online together chatting.
Looking forward to that.
And you know, it's a similar thing with him. It's like his quality of motion is expressed in his face. It's expressed in the way he thinks and talks, and yours is the same. Your voice almost gives away how you move.
So interesting to hear that. Yeah. Mm.
So it's but you know, how these things come about, you know, it's like, how does that come about for you?
Yeah, it's almost something that you can't plan, no? Life just paints you
Mm-hmm.
the way you are then.
Yeah. So what's got you to where you're at right now? So you're in, because for a while you were living in India, weren't you? And you were teaching out there a lot.
Yes, I mean, the thing at the time in Brighton, I realized that I was becoming more and more lost, not being a dancer anymore. And as I said before, thank God for a while I didn't see myself as a dancer, but just was open to however movement in my body would reveal itself. But at the end of this chapter, let's say, living in Brighton and trying to make sense of how do you even earn money and all that. I was so poor at that time, struggling on all levels, and then just getting all this wonderful um, stuff to move with at the same time. So um, I was invited by a light designer that I'd worked with to India at that time, and we taught 3 weeks a workshop, Movement and Light, where light would be, and that was inspired by again Russell Manifold, whom I suppose, I was still kind of following in his giant footsteps, um, trying out how light and the body could show the dance in such a unique way. So there we were, and we were in India for 3 weeks, so not just 2, 3 days as workshops usually go. And it was enough time to realize that I knew who I was there. I was most relevant to this world and myself and to others when I was doing that. And it was the most precarious existence that you could pursue, to be a freelance contemporary dancer. But I came back from those 3 weeks in India and realized that that was the way forward. That whatever was happening would have to happen because I owned it. That I was essentially a dancer, and when I moved, all good things would happen. And that's kind of what brought an end to staying in England at that time, because I got a job in Germany that fall. And then 2 months later, there was a call from England. A very, very wonderful choreographer, Finn Walker, was missing a dancer, and someone who worked with her said, "Why don't you check out this guy in Switzerland?" I was actually back in Switzerland at that time. So she called me and said, "Would you want to work with me?" And then I was with her for a year. And in that year, I was in Covent Garden in London, and realized I was just doing the same thing as a ballet dancer, just in another color, in another disguise. I was basically in the same system. So that wasn't what I wanted to continue either. Although the experience working with her was wonderful. She worked from energy and trying to find truth, a big word, but something more true than just looking good. Or yeah, it's a big chapter, big thing. But I realized during that time that not only was I a dancer at heart, but I was being totally shaped and predicted by the system that I was working with. So as a contemporary dancer, I ended up in Covent Garden Theatre and went on tour with the work, whoopie-doo. And the British Council was telling me that if I worked with such and such a technology, or took someone from Africa on board for the next project, I would get money. And I was like, but why would I want somebody from Africa if I don't know anybody from Africa? And of course, that's always nice to take on board ideas, but I didn't want to be dictated anymore. It was a little bit the same question that I had if I'm a ballet dancer. Is that really me? Yes, it was me, I found out later. But at that time, I needed to go somewhere where there was no, at least Western art system. And I felt also that I was always missing something, missing out on something was missing always here for me. And when I went back to India for the first time and stepped out of the plane, it wasn't just the hot air that hit my body, but a wave of something that I went, that's what it is. It's a way of being.
Mm.
And I don't know how to be that when I'm in the West. So those two questions led me actually to pack my bags and um, with an open ticket to India to first of all just do what I did in Brighton, which was contemporary dance. I wasn't so interested in wearing colorful clothes and wearing sandals, and also finding my um, claim something about India when I not being a visitor, paying rent to a landlord, fighting for your water, uh, traveling like everyone else there, and just not having the option in 3 weeks I'm gone. It's all so lovely here. But also staying there in monsoon time, which is, wow, that's another story.
Yes, I've heard.
When it,
Friend,
when all the sky opens and the water just comes down, and that's for the next 2 weeks. And one time I found a home in the Himalayas. I had a house there and rebuilt it exactly to be my dream house. The colors, the materials, everything was so affordable in India. From being a poor dancer, all of a sudden, because I was working in design colleges with contemporary dance and diploma courses, I was all of a sudden well off again. I had a house in the Himalayas looking at 7,000-meter giants in front of my garden. And so, yeah, what a shift, no? And then just being in this environment where contemporary dance was a new territory. There was a young generation that said, I don't want to just marry and fulfill these obligations. I feel my body will show me the answers, and they're open-ended, and there's no system anymore. I kind of went, yes, I've just been through this. What are you doing with it? And it was so rich, this exchange with all the dancers and artists there. But at the same time, I felt, um, yeah, that came to an end because of two important things. One was that contact improvisation was still informing so much of what I did. And I was approached then one winter in Goa, where everybody hung out because it was so beautiful and nice and warm. Um, why wouldn't I lead a contact improvisation workshop? And I found a very, very exciting DJ who provided just the right sound. So that I said, this is an open space. We will explore through meeting through touch. This forum where you let gravity kind of take over a little more, and the rest, the next hour, we don't know where we're going. And so we just did that with the exquisite sounds of this DJ. Only that in Goa, it turned out to be something very different than what happened in a dance studio. It became all about chemistry and sexual excitement and not being in a country where you're not allowed to touch. Namaste, but you don't touch. And yet you're thrust into the masses and in the buses against bodies. And so we were all confused. And we were all relieved that we would find that safe space for an hour with beautiful music, expressing all the longings and emptiness that we felt, longing for a partner, for love, for touch, for togetherness, for the bigger picture, and so on and so on. And so I became this contact improvisation guru, which was inspiring for a while, also to be surrounded by beautiful women all the time. And so it plays to the ego in so many ways. But at the same time, I was feeling more and more empty. That is not why I dance, I felt. And the other thing is I was having just one conversation too many, where an Indian dancer approached me and said, when you wiggle this, why do you do that? Why do you need to wiggle? Why do you need to let us watch that? You expose us to that madness, and what is this silliness about contemporary dance and all that? And I kind of went, no, I just don't want to start again.
mm.
We live in postmodern times. You haven't arrived yet. That's right. Oh my God, I needed to be back somewhere where I would speak with somebody and we would have the same discourse. We would, and it was such a relief after all those years to be invited by chance to Berlin and meeting my beautiful wife just in those days, as I told you, and then very soon meeting up with, yeah, the relief of the first conversation where I didn't have to justify anything. I could just ask the question, what if what we do would be about, what do you think? Oh, really? You think that? Oh, interesting. And we were involved and we started making a work.
Mm.
And it was huge. So I could strip myself of being this guru figure, which was, yeah, like a difficult mirror that was held to me. An ego that always was performing as a dancer. Um, yeah, it was just, yeah, it was very too tempting, too sweet to resist, I suppose. But at that time, when I came back, I was struck with the feeling I'm in the right place. Shortly after that, I got very sick, and um, just a lung infection that didn't go away, and then became worse and worse. And finally, I was kind of on my deathbed when a physician finally said, "You know, I have a way to kind of take it out of your body," because his opinion was that it wasn't cancer, and he was right. So I left. I kind of most of my right lung left my body that day, and I still struggled for another 1 or 2 months, very much teetering on the edge of life and death. My body was still getting infected. And one of my friends said, "So has the dance left you?" We were on a Skype call, and I looked at him and said, "No, it's a very small dance. It's so faint, but it's everything I am." And there was healing all of a sudden in my body then again. And so the first step that I did was that as I was very sick, I had filed for a grant for a piece, and as I was dying, the grant was came through, sort of 40, 50,000 pounds, make your work. And I was working with somebody in Hamburg at that time, and she said, "Well, I'll carry the load, and you just see if you can bring whatever dance you have into this work." And at that time, I was talking to you also to maybe meet up and exchange again. So again, it was again about these principles that made up our, in a way, our relationship and our meeting. And yeah, I was at that time hoping that maybe we could find a way, but it wasn't so important actually at that time. It was more important that I started to learn that if I wanted to live, I needed to keep moving. The first job I got was in Bern, and I was just invited to teach whatever I wanted to every Tuesday, and I'm still doing it every Tuesday. And there's a dance community that has grown around just where's the breath, where's the ground, let's go into movement. And of course, a kind of aesthetic that I'm interested as a choreographer. So how to train the body became much more important than ever before. That's something I feel I totally missed out on when I was with you in Brighton. I would love to ask you so much about how do you take the body into running. I love running. I didn't know that at that time. Cycling, weightlifting we looked at. I still do it, still whenever I can.
Yeah, the methodology is the thing that you know. it's come up even more now. I mean, I still train, I still work with that method, and I train maybe 1 or 2 people with that method, you know, because it's not easy. You can't turn the method into a great big class system. It doesn't
No,
work.
it's not a system.
It's not a system, you know. So the methodology of running, I've worked with a lot of people with that, and I think I'm happy to at least have my father as someone that's always been a role model. And he used to run barefoot on cinder tracks when he was a teenager, and he's always had the barefoot running in his soul. But now he, of course, uses running spikes, and he still has the same run he's always ever had. So at 82, he's still got that beautiful stride, and
Wow.
heard with it, you know. So
Yeah, I saw the images just yesterday that you showed me. They're stunning.
it's a really incredible. It's remarkable to
Mm.
watch. But you know, so I kind of bring a methodology to people's running. I mean, we can look at that at some point. We can actually play with some ideas in our rooms like this as well, just to give you some sort of technique of something to play with. And
I would love to. Really, it was one of those surprises again that life has, that deals out, that I discovered that I loved running.
mm,
When it wasn't well oriented, when it was with gravity,
yeah,
there was the ecstasy again, no?
amazing.
And it's a technique,
Yeah,
and you need to be really present.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Mm.
Chris, we're gonna have to wind up. Time's gone on. We've done a good long chat there. So
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
how do people find you? If anyone, you know, because how would people get to know about you? Is there, what would they do to find you?
Um, so much of India was disappearing from the radar.
Mm,
And so when I resurfaced, I kind of liked that idea that I would be under the radar and people would have to find me. And word of mouth would be enough. And strangely enough, it's been that way. Um, in recent times, I realized that now's the time finally to have a website. So my wife is giving me a website next month for my birthday. So you'll find me on that website. Otherwise, if you Google my name with dance or yoga, you will find me on the net.
right, okay.
I'm kind of integrated into several other websites. And I have a website with my wife, which is more about the art that we create together.
Okay.
But you will also, on that website, yeah, there's a kind of page where you will see where I'm teaching my next workshop,
Okay.
next performance.
Okay. What's that website called?
It's called Art Meets You.
Okay. Wow. Cool. Okay. Very good.
Mm.
Okay, my friend. It's wonderful to do this.
Well, it's always such a luxury to have time together.
Definitely. And what we'll do is we'll hook up. We'll be meeting with you and Rupert Johnson and Linus Johansson, and we might throw the curveball having Stephen Braybrook in there. We'll see how that goes as well.
Right. He'll be the goblin in the works.
He's got such a different aspect on things, but it's good because he makes us question things in a different way.
Yeah,
So
that's very healthy.
thank you. Thank you very much. And
Thank you so much, Gary.
I love doing this with you anyway.
Mm.